talking with Katharine Pons, who is a neurodiversity expert, ADHD expert, and mental health expert, and runs the Thrive program, which we're really interested to hear about, and does lots of other work. Maybe, though, I'll let you sort of introduce yourself. But firstly, thanks for joining. It's great to have you on. Well, it's a real honor for us. And thanks. And maybe if you want to just sort of introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a real honor for me as well. I'm delighted to be here tonight with you all, to be able to share the knowledge that I have. And you're right, that is what I do. I help people who have mental health issues, but I also help people who just want to improve their well-being. It's not just about the people who struggle. So I did come into this profession, the coaching profession, if you like, through my angle of having ADHD myself, having been diagnosed as an adult, and having for many years struggled with anxiety, actually more than depression, and never really having understood why I was anxious, because there were never any, everyone's always trying to look for reasons why you have anxiety. And I'd had therapy, I'd had counselling, all sorts of different things. And the jigsaw puzzle kind of came together when I understood that I had ADHD. And of course, we know that untreated, unacknowledged ADHD, of course, can trigger anxiety. And that for me started when I was very young, about the age of 6. So my whole career, if you like, then was focused around my interests within that. And then I sort of pieced it all together and became a mental health coach.
Wow, that's amazing. So how, if you don't mind me just asking, like, how did you, perhaps begin to piece it together? What is it? How did you sort of arrive at the recognition that this may be ADHD, because obviously you have that underlying anxiety.
Yeah, sure. I mean, my anxiety started very early on. I was about 6 years old, and it really did come from nowhere. I sort of developed a phobia, the phobia of vomiting, which actually is more common than you think. It's called emetophobia. And for some unknown reason, and still to this day we won't know why, but I started to be very afraid of being sick, especially being sick when I was away from my mother. Say if I was in the school canteen, something like that. And on and off, this phobia would plague me, if you like, and I'd get panic attacks. And then as I grew into my adult life, it got worse and worse. So for me, I'd always given it that label of, I have a phobia. That's my lot in life. And I suffer from anxiety. And yes, I was quite a stressed person, quite emotionally up and down, if you like. I mean, that comes with great benefits. I ended up going into a career in acting and, loved the theatre and all the rest of it. So getting in touch with my emotions was not a difficult thing for me, and ended up being, something that's positive. So I'm quite creative, and quite a thespian and drama queen, if you want. So anyway, that was the upside. But of course, the downside was that, I was really struggling with anxiety. And there was a few times in my 20s where that would verge on depression, because it's a burden. It gets you down, that constant high level chronic anxiety that you can't really explain. And people would just say to you, well, what's the matter? And I remember going to the GP several times, and they would say, well, what's wrong? And I would say, well, I just can't cope. Actually, adulting is really difficult for me. And now that with the hindsight of my knowledge of what ADHD is, that's a typical, especially for a woman, a typical presentation. And this is where, we can talk about this till the cows come home, that, primary care on the NHS, sadly, is not picking up. I should have, the person should have immediately understood, you need an assessment for ADHD. But of course, at that time, I don't think I'd ever even heard of ADHD. This was in my mid-20s, and I'm now 43. So yeah, we were talking nearly 20 years ago.
What question? Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Go ahead. No, I was just going to...
Go for it.
Sorry.
ADHD interrupting.
Yeah, that's definitely me. What questions should they have asked, you think, in the situation? Obviously, they didn't pick it up. You said, how do you think maybe GP practitioners might be able to?
I think if you have a woman, I think it very much depends on the age of the patient and the sex of the patient, because we know ADHD presents differently at different points in your life. So as a woman at that age, if you're hearing that, generalized anxiety, inability to cope, not really being able to pinpoint what the issue is, that should be a red flag for ADHD and autism as well, I think, that whole neurodiverse umbrella. So it's not so much about what questions she should have asked, it's more about, I required knowledge from her, actually. Her sort of picking up, going, do you know what? Yes, you may have generalized anxiety, or you may actually have a neurodevelopmental condition here. And either way, she should have referred me to secondary care. I should have been referred to the NHS psychiatrist, but of course I wasn't. I was offered antidepressants and that was it. Wow. I'm not even sure. Well, I think perhaps at that point I was offered counselling because it was early at university. So I got the counselling, the CBT at the time, through the university, not through the GP.
Right. Yeah, I think the anxiety, as you say, is a red flag, right? I mean, it's often to do with, just the inability to cope, as you said, with, all of the sort of social expectations, norms, cultural norms and expectation, pressures. And obviously there are more things going on, but that's often part of it, isn't it? I think
it is. It's that idea. I mean, many people in the neurodiverse community talk about feeling overwhelmed, don't they? This complete overwhelm, and you can't help but compare yourself to others. And I would look and I'd see, God, they really do manage to keep their houses tidy, and they do manage to, take the, I don't know, social rejection or difficulty, or the boyfriend who no longer wants to go out with you. This was, I'm talking about when I was back in my 20s now. They do manage to deal with that so much better than I'm dealing with it. They're not getting really emotional when a small thing or medium thing happens. So there was that sort of awareness, and it's not a conscious awareness. It's a kind of general, I think you ask anybody who's been diagnosed with a neurodevelopmental condition, every single person will say to you, I felt different from everybody else.
Yeah. And they'll often experience a lot of social exclusion. They won't, a lot of stigma. And, I think in part, the reason why a lot of people cope, perhaps, neurotypical people might be able to seemingly cope better than others with neurodiverse conditions is in part because they're drawing from their social spheres, their friends and their social capital, let's say. But with autistic people and other neurodiverse conditions, presumably that capital is going to be a lot smaller, isn't it, because of the stigma and exclusion and the judgment that come along. So that's a problem.
It is, and I think that it's not called neurodevelopmental for no reason. We know that the brain develops at a slower rate. So certainly for ADHD, there is a 30% lag. So actually, whereas the neurotypical brain will come to full maturation in someone's early 20s, for someone with ADHD, it will be in their early 30s. So actually, when I was seeking help in my mid-20s, there is a chart that you can look it up, what the executive age is, and I do stress this has nothing to do with intelligence at all, but you can sort of calculate an executive function age that's linked, and it tends to be 4 or 5 or 6 years at that age behind. So it may well be that at 25 your executive function is only actually the same as someone who's 18. So don't quote me on that, and you can look
sure.
But there is a lag, and therefore, of course, I couldn't cope with the same kind of demands on me at 25 when actually my brain was still developing.
Right.
That age, I was supposed to be, I stayed in education a long time. I ended up doing an undergraduate degree that was 4 years and a postgraduate degree, and I ended up staying in education because that was routine, that felt safe. I even stayed in halls of residence for as long as I could because I knew where I was at. So So that shift to kind of adulting and being, oh, I've got to pay my own rent now and I've got to decide what career I'm going to do, that for me was completely overwhelming.
Right. That sounds very familiar with in my life as well. I spent a long time getting my degree, a lot longer than other people. I even took a 5-year break to go and work in retail, and then came back to education and did it then. So that, and there was always this kind of sense of underachievement. So you know, and it's kind of struggling developmentally to catch up with peers and things like that. So I can well understand that. Also struggling with general decision making and things like that, and motivation to do things as well.
100%. I think you've hit on something really important. That notion of underachievement is another diagnostic red flag. I've never met anybody in the ADHD community, and probably in the autism community as well, who doesn't feel a sense of underachievement if they haven't been diagnosed as a child. You know, many of us in our generation who were diagnosed as adults feel a sense of underachievement. And it's not about, oh, I wish I could do more and, you know, aim for the stars and what have you. It is a known underachievement in relation to what you know you're capable of achieving.
Which just sort of highlights the critical importance that practitioners, professionals, and just generally in society, we're more aware and more, you know, understanding of
in education issues. In education as well, they need proper training as well.
So get picked up early.
I mean, one of the things I had to do, of course, when I was diagnosed at 40 was obviously prove that I had impairment as a child. So my mother diligently had kept my school reports, and I was lucky enough to be able to reread them through that filter, that new knowledge that I had, that I probably had ADHD. And I mean, it was obvious. You know, I remember one evening going through 15 years of school or whatever it was, because she'd kept everything for me, which was brilliant. And being able to literally write down, I created a Word document with all the different typical ADHD statements, such as, you know, when she applies herself, she produces really good work. Or Katharine's a sensitive child. She's managing her nervous tummies better than she has before. You know, all this stuff, which is like, when you know and you have that knowledge of what ADHD is, it's just, it might as well be written all over it, stamp ADHD, ADHD, ADHD.
Do you think today we're at a level where educationalists are able to identify it in children or not?
I think that it would be unfair to say no, because there are educationalists out there who are taking the trouble to inform themselves, to educate themselves, and there are some, I think, who are doing a good job. So it's unfair to say no across the board. But, you know, I've got a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old, and much as my school is supportive, I don't feel that the level of education is knowledge is enough. And no, I don't. I think actually on roll, there were only a couple of children who are diagnosed ADHD, when actually we know that there's no way statistically that's the case. It's much higher than that.
So what do you think needs to happen to maybe, you know, improve the whole situation?
I think ADHD education in schools needs to be absolutely mandatory, and of course that education needs to be of a sufficient enough level, because of course at the moment schools can just say, oh, I've had ADHD training, and they may well have just, I don't know, I don't know
basic,
I'm not an educationist. I don't know the intricacies of the training they've had, but I don't think it's to a sufficiently high standard.
It's education in inverted commas, yeah. James, I think, has got some questions for you. Go ahead, James, mate.
I think we were talking about you know, just the term ADHD is hardly ever heard really in society, and probably there needs to be that same kind of campaigning going on that there was for autism for the last decade, you know, to bring things to the same level. I know that I'll just mention we were we've recorded a podcast with an organisation called Neurodiverse Nurses, and we'll probably that would be a good place to mention this and try and, because they're trying to influence the mandatory autism training for NHS staff,
Right.
in a way that will impact positively impact the way patients are treated and things like that. So I think that if that can all come under the umbrella of neurodiversity, then I think there's a lot of input that can be had for ADHD as well. He was telling us that there's literally thousands of neurodiverse staff in the NHS that are coming under this sort of banner, this sort of organisation, and I think that'd be a good place to explore these things and make progress.
Just to add briefly add, I was on the call. I was on that podcast recording with James when we interviewed him. His name is Joan Pons Laplana. He is just he is a hero in every sense.
Absolutely.
He's autistic. I think he's got ADHD. I'm not entirely sure about that. He's definitely autistic, and he's a frontline nurse working during COVID-19.
Wow.
He finished his shift, experiencing and seeing terrible things, as you can imagine, and then happily came on and talked with us about the amazing work that he's trying to set up through his organization called Neurodiverse Nurses, which is to really, as James was saying, push the awareness and emphasis on the fact that nurses can also be neurodivergent, and we need to be working with that and recognizing that, because there's been no emphasis on that at all. But that's also presumably somewhere where we can make an impact, right, in the healthcare sector, and raise awareness with ADHD. And
if it happens there, then hopefully it'll snowball, and then other sectors like education will, their training will change, and things like that. I know it's already happened in the police force, and they're sort of they're helping out this organization as well to bring it to the same level of training there.
But Katharine, you were saying before we started the call that it's your view that ADHD is a little bit behind with regard to how the sort of awareness that autism's got.
Yes.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the general consensus in the ADHD community is that probably in terms of public relations, if you like, the ADHD brand, if we can call it that, is about 10 years behind autism. I know that there are groups who are lobbying to get an ADHD Act through Parliament, and I've sat on a number of all-party parliamentary groups for ADHD, which we were very lucky to have had MP Jo Platt chair, but unfortunately she lost her seat at the last election. And with everything that's been going on, we've yet to start those up again. But I know that's in the pipeline. So I think the label of neurodiversity is a really helpful one, because anyway, within the community as individuals who are neurodiverse, we don't see it as black and white anyway. I mean, there's lots of crossover in terms of, don't like the word, but symptoms or impairment, whatever we want to call it, between autism, between ADHD, between dyslexia, etc., etc. So I think the broader label is a helpful one, and I think it does allow this idea that ultimately, well, some of us are wired this way, some of us are wired that way, and that's that.
Yeah.
Are you wired the neurotypical way, or are you wired the neurodiverse way? Actually, the details of how you are neurodiverse from one ADHD individual to another, it will be vastly different. And this is also why it doesn't get picked up. I mean, my husband has ADHD. You asked me at the beginning of the talk how I found out I had ADHD myself. Well, actually, we found out he had ADHD first.
Oh, right.
And that became, and he'd suffered from depression and anxiety most of his life as well. And when he, same as me, in his early 40s, realised that he had ADHD. And by then we'd had 2 children. I knew it was genetic. So I started doing a whole load of research. And after a while, I was like, who am I kidding? I have this too. So it was self-diagnosed in the end, as is for many, many people, many adults. So, yeah, and my point was that ultimately, if you knew my husband and I, you'd think you don't have the same condition because it presents in such different ways. So I think this broader term is actually a much better PR term, if you like, because it's more accessible and we can just talk about, you know, something much broader. We don't have to go into the details necessarily.
And I suppose that's something that I've not previously thought much about, the importance of the kind of branding, because that does play a role, doesn't it, in the strategy, the overall strategy towards improving public understanding.
I'm talking with this kind of language. I've got a background in marketing for many years. I work in marketing, so I'm using the language. I'm not in any way suggesting that it is a brand. It's not. I'm just saying that the reality is that we can only educate through communication, and the reality is that communication is what we're doing now. It's articles in the press, and so there are parallels in terms of how the message is disseminated. That's what I mean. So yeah, I don't want to upset anyone by people thinking that I think it is. It's not.
No, yeah, absolutely.
Could I ask a question?
Go ahead, mate.
It might be a bit complicated and go all over the place, but the way I first heard about ADHD was in hearing a lot of negative kind of effects it has, like there's kind of struggles with executive functioning, the stress, the anxiety, all these kind of negative things. Do you think that and also with what you're saying about people going undiagnosed, do you think that contributes to the amount of people in society that are kind of self-medicating, if you will, with alcoholism, with drug taking and things like that? Because I know I've heard that there are drugs that can help make people's lives a lot more easy, you know, to manage ADHD and that kind of thing. Could you please talk a little bit about that, if you can? Thanks.
I think it's true that there are sort of 2 key messages. Unless you have knowledge around ADHD, there are sort of 2 key things that you have somehow picked up on. One is that it sort of is disruptive, bad behavior in young boys. That tends to be one thing that people know. And then the other is that you end up having to give someone a pill to sort them out. And so medication is seen as something negative. Those are the kind of 2 messages that you come across time and time again that seem to have just have filtered out there over the years. Obviously, we know ADHD is way more than that. Now, medication does work for ADHD. NICE guidelines suggest 4 or 5 different types of medication for ADHD. I take medication myself, and it's been very successful for me. My children also do, and it's been successful for them. So medication does help, but it's only one half of the it's not a solution, but it's only one half of the approach. Management, if you like. I like to talk more about ADHD management. The other half is the kind of psychoeducation side of it, and that's and the knowledge, of course, about what ADHD is. And I think, if I go on my own personal experience of people who have lived for many years with undiagnosed ADHD, in some way, shape, or form, there is self-medication, whether it be nicotine, alcohol, drugs, even taking ending up going to the GP and being given antidepressants, which is about the only thing that you or in France, certainly I know that the French GPs give a lot of the benzodiazepam to calm you down, so the equivalent of Valium. So, you know, one way or another, you end up kind of trying to find something that calms your nervous system down. So, yes, it's no wonder that there are many people out there who are struggling with substance abuse and alcohol and what we call addiction, dependency.
James, do you want to pick up on that? Or
Well, absolutely. I think it's absolutely essential then what you're doing, educating people and helping people with your if you could talk a little bit about your work, that would be brilliant.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a consultant, what we call a Thrive consultant. The program is called the Thrive program. This is one of the booklets that we use, and actually the person who wrote the program, Rob Kelly, has ADHD himself. So it's absolutely no surprise that this program is brilliant for the neurodiverse brain. Now, it is a psychoeducation program, and it's open to everybody. It's not just for the neurodiverse community. But of course, the reality is because of many years of having not necessarily had our conditions picked up, because of the amount of negative messages that we've been given. I was talking about my school report only earlier. That behavior can be an issue, so the child may be chastised, etc. Because of all of that, because of the inability to cope, as we discussed, what ends up happening on top of our neurodiverse brain is that we end up suffering from, we layering on the mental health problems. Neurodiversity is not a mental health problem.
No,
not a mental health problem, and it need not ever be a mental health problem. It shouldn't really sit under psychiatry. It should sit under neurology or neuroscience, or I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but we become depressed and we have anxiety because we haven't understood that our nervous systems are on constant high alert and that we're not managing our thinking correctly. And of course, we're being given negative messages from mostly the society that is mainly neurotypical. And that has a negative impact on our self-esteem. So as a result of that, we are particularly, we're a great audience for the program in the sense that we can be very, very much helped by it. And so what it is, it's a psychoeducational program. So it actually teaches you how our minds work. And actually, if you think back to when we were at school, yes, we were taught maths, yes, we were taught geography, science, languages, etc. But no one ever taught us how our mind works, how our brains work, how our thought processes come about, how we form belief systems. No one's ever taught us this. So, of course, it is extremely difficult to then manage your mental well-being. So that's the premise. The premise is that it takes you through these different elements. And I think there's another important thing why it's really, really good for the neurodiverse community. And I've taken people with neurodiversity through the program, and they've found it very, very helpful. And one of the other reasons is that, of course, particularly with the ADHD brain, because it's a problem of self-regulation ultimately. The brain is not inhibiting in the same way as a neurotypical brain will inhibit. And what do we mean by that is that it's not filtering information in the same way. So we get 50,000 thoughts a day. A normal human being will have 50,000 thoughts a day. That's a huge amount of information to have to process.
It's interesting.
Now, the person with neurodiversity will not be processing information in the same way as a neurotypical person. So the brain functions, and I'm not a neurologist, so this is my layman's approach to describing it to you, but if you imagine a spotlight on a stage that zooms in on a piece of information, actually the brain doesn't function like that. The brain doesn't zoom in on information that it wants and grabs it. It does the opposite. It removes everything that's redundant. It eliminates what it doesn't need. And that's what we call the inhibitory function. So actually, if you imagine decision making and managing your thinking is all about understanding what you need to eliminate. That's what we call inhibition. So that's why we see a child who you say he's not allowed a chocolate bar at 4 or 5. It will be a normal thing for them to have a tantrum because they're not inhibiting the first thought which comes to their mind, which is, but I really want one and I want one now. They're not inhibiting that thought. They're going with the very first thought that comes to their mind. as a neurotypical child develops, so they understand that it's not in their long-term interest to act upon that first initial thought. They learn that actually they may be deprived of the chocolate, or they may end up on, on the naughty step, etc., etc. And so they learn to inhibit the first initial thought that they have, and they will then have a second thought, which is, okay, well, mum will end up putting me on the naughty step, so okay, I'll go off and do something else. So if you imagine that people with ADHD do not learn that process, that's where it becomes really debilitating. That's where the thoughts, which are triggering emotion in us, are then triggering reactions of anger, reactions of frustration. We talk about impulsivity with ADHD. That is what is happening. So what a person with a neurotypical person learns is they learn to self-coach. Ultimately, by having a fully functioning, successful process of inhibition, they're learning to self-coach. They're learning to say to themselves, they're learning to develop a positive inner voice that helps them to understand that they should act or think, according to long-term gain, importance, reward, etc., etc. So what the program does is that it kind of breaks it all down for you. It goes back and it explains to you what is a belief system, how are our thoughts created, and by going through the program, it helps you to start listening to your inner voice and actually coaches you into becoming your own self-coach. That's why
fascinating.
It's so brilliant. Yeah.
Right. So it's about coaching the individual to self-coach.
Exactly.
Right. And thus thriving,
Exactly.
as per the name of the. Yeah. I mean, for a child though, it must be enormously stressful to have to make those adjustments and go through that journey, or not even just a child, anyone really, but I suppose particularly a child, maybe. I'm guessing, but that sort of when presumably you're getting, because you're not filtering the noise as you described it.
Yes.
The noise and the negative consequences of the whole process not working out, and everything else is hitting your self-esteem, increasing confusion, anxiety.
Absolutely.
Right. And then you have you have poor mental health, of course, children, everybody has mental health, children, infants have mental health. And so presumably if your mental health is impaired, then it's going to be a harder game, or game's not quite the right word, but a harder challenge to self-coach and to get through this, right? So is that what you're saying, that your program really tries to support, is to sort of take you through that? But it must be tough for those people that don't have access to a program like that, or just children, and which is really why it's so critical that we really protect everybody's mental health, right? And give them a better chance to cope.
Yeah. I mean, the program has taken many thousands of people. So there are 60 or 70 consultants across the country. And, altogether there have been thousands of people taking through the program. There are lots of testimonials. But of course, in order to get the endorsement of the NHS, like CBT has, you need, it's a massively long and complicated road, of course. So when and if the program will ever be free for people, for the general public, which would be amazing. I mean, our motto, our kind of message is that we want to democratize well-being. That's what we believe in.
Wow. It's a powerful message. Yeah, it's
a powerful message. And for sure, if we could all work for free, we would, because we want to be helping people. There's no doubt about that.
So the aim here is to really get it commissioned by the NHS, get picked up and made available.
Well, I mean, I think Rob, whose program it is, has definitely considered these kind of pathways. I think I don't know whether that's one of his objectives right now, because I think it's very bureaucratic, of course. But certainly, yes, to get as many people as we can thriving, that's certainly the aim. We've
got a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Of course.
So we've got Katie McMaster. Can you see this on your screen?
Yes, I can. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So Katie McMaster's asked, can an unmanaged ADHD cause high stress? Almost an inability to cope with everyday life, including managing to access any form of education.
Yeah, hi Katie. Thanks for your question. Absolutely 100% it can. So what ends up happening with the ADHD brain? Partly, I think, I don't know scientifically, but partly because we are being bombarded with so much information all the time, getting sensory overload and overwhelm, etc., is that our nervous system is on very high alert. So you can imagine the primitive human beings who lived in the jungle and needed to have their wits about them all day long in case a predator came along. They would be hypervigilant. They would be, constantly worried. It's almost like in our modern lives, we still have that high level of nervous energy. So many people with ADHD complain of other kind of issues like headaches and stomach pain and poor digestion and not good sleep. These are all a knock-on effect. The fact that the body is never really managing to calm itself down enough. So of course that has once again a knock-on effect on the fact that you can't cope with all the demands that you have in terms of just cooking yourself food, keeping your house tidy, and then accessing information and being able to education, and being able to focus on all the work that is being demanded of you. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you so much. We've got another question here from Pauline Den Hodroma. Apologies if I've completely mispronounced that. Do you by any chance have a list of symptoms for adults and for children to self-diagnose if they have ADHD? Which I suppose, go ahead.
So the best place that I can send you on the web is the Attitude website. So it's an American website. It's called Attitude. So attitude, but with the 2 Ds instead, Attitude. And they have a couple of self-tests. So you can actually online sit a test. They have a specific girls and women ADHD test, general test, and one for men as well, and boys, I think. And to be honest, that's the best place to go. You just answer the questions. Obviously, it isn't a diagnosis, it's just an indication. But if you're scoring high on those tests, then it's worth getting an assessment. Yeah. And the other thing is, I'd say, in true ADHD hyperfocus style, the minute I realized when my husband was first diagnosed, I just went on a sort of binge of what ADHD was, and I watched loads of videos, particularly Russell Barkley. Dr. Russell Barkley has a number of great videos online that you can watch, hours worth of videos actually, which I highly recommend. He's one of the leading ADHD experts in the world.
Thank you, that's great. Just going back to the point that you made about coping, as you were saying, it was really interesting, about the sort of hypervigilance and how that, how if you're not able to sort of manage the sort of stress and cope and not able to cope effectively with it all, could kind of spill over into these symptoms you were talking about, of upset stomachs and headaches, migraines, etc. I suppose this is particularly pertinent in the situation we're all living in at the moment, isn't it, with COVID-19? And one of the reasons why James and I really wanted to talk to you today was to sort of get your insight on how people with ADHD or other neurodiverse conditions might be able to sort of manage their mental health during this very anxiety-provoking, unsettling, confusing time.
Sure.
So anything.
It's a good question. It's really important question. I think there's a couple of interesting things. I think from all the forums that I'm on and hearing what people have to say about COVID-19 from the ADHD community, is there's a couple of things happening. One is that actually people with ADHD are great in a crisis. They can change quite quickly. They can adapt. They're very strategic. They're very creative. I know that when my parents live in Paris, so actually we were getting information from them a week earlier, and I kind of understood that this was coming when there was still a lot of denial in the UK that last week. And I then started reading up a little bit about it, and I quickly realised that we're going to go into lockdown, and this is not going to be weeks, it's going to be possibly months. And I think the minute I realised that, I transformed one of the bedrooms in my house into like a mini school room. And I was like, right, we're going to have a system. The kids are going to do this. So, I straight away went into resilient kind of solution mode. So that's the great aspect of ADHD. And I think probably it'd be great to hear from any of the listeners if people have responded like that. The flip side is that, we're susceptible to anxiety anyway. Any human being, whether they're neurodiverse or neurotypical, does not like uncertainty. And of course, all of a sudden, we are confronted with uncertainty. This is the key word in terms of the crisis that we're living. We don't know what's going to happen. Nobody can tell us when there'll be a vaccine, if we'll get ill, who around us will get ill, etc., etc., etc. It's so many unknowns. Now, actually, in answer to your question, how can we deal with that? Within the Thrive program, there's a great approach. We talk about how powerful we are, or how powerful we can become in terms of managing our thinking. And there are two sort of aspects to our sense of power and control. One is direct influence, which is the power and control that you have over experiences that you can control in your life. So you take someone who's afraid of flying, they can choose whether or not they get on an airplane. That's direct influence. I can control this, so therefore I can choose. And I know whether I am or not going to get on the plane. Now, the other side of our sense of power and control is what we call secondary control, which is all the experiences in our life that we can't control. So one of them is the COVID crisis. Our lives have completely changed. Another thing might be the weather, or it might be other people, the way other people react. We can't control that. And of course, that brings us into the territory of needing to cope and tolerate, most of the time, things that we don't necessarily like. We may get a negative reaction from someone else. So how can we cope with that negative reaction? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to tolerate the uncomfortable feeling that we're getting. And so this is also something that's happening, is that most of our lives we try and stay within the sphere of direct influence. We try and stay in the area that feels the most comfortable, which is controlling the things that we can control. And actually, a lot of anxiety is wanting to control things that we can't control instead of accepting them. We end up putting a lot of effort into what we call anticipatory anxiety. So the person who's afraid of flying, if for whatever reason they absolutely have to get on a plane, their life depends on it, they will actually create a great deal more anxiety before, often, than actually when they're on the plane, or take someone who's phobic. My fear of vomiting, actually, the amount of anxiety I would create around vomiting, this is before I went through the program, was way, way higher than the odd occasion when I would actually be sick. In the moment, there would be much less anxiety. It's always often anticipatory. So then it becomes about coping, and partly the coping is about tolerating, and then of course the tolerating is about accepting the situation for what it is and having a realistic appraisal. So rather than hoping that the lockdown will end in mid-May, what are my facts? What facts do I have? Well, right now the scientific community don't know a great deal about this virus. What we do know is, sadly, many people are very bad, not many people, but people are badly affected enough for it to affect our national health system. And therefore, right now, it's looking unlikely that life's going to go back to normal in May or June. So then you're being more realistic about it, and you're then coming to terms with the fact that actually, for the foreseeable future, this is the new normal.
And then presumably your expectations aren't, broken, which can then harm your well-being even further, right? If you're,
exactly.
yeah.
If
So
you're hoping that, so if you're hoping that mid-May kids are going to go back to school and it's all going to be, lockdown is going to be lifted and it's all going to go back to the way it was, then of course there's a huge amount of disappointment when that doesn't occur.
So it's about trying to sort of manage and control your thoughts in a way that's reasonable, rational, healthy, and can lead to acceptance, is what you're saying.
Yeah, so you still want to exercise direct influence in your life. So you still want to do many things in your life where you are in control of your experiences. And what does that mean? That means that taking up a new hobby, learning new things, challenging yourself, doing interesting things, spending time with family, and your children, whoever you're living with, so that, deciding that you cook more, whatever it might be. So there are many aspects of our life that we still can control. And of course, it's in those areas of our life that we build skills and resources. And then it's a question of accepting the areas that we can't control. It's learning to tolerate them if they are uncomfortable.
That's really clear and useful. Thank you so much for that. We have a question from Katie McMaster again. She's picked up on your previous response. If you don't mind, I'll just read this out. Thank you for your response. This is probably hard to answer, but how can I help my son engage with anything? He's happy doing what he wants to do, but gets quite aggressive when asked to do anything else. Listening to what you're saying, I feel he's reached the point of being too hypervigilant and therefore wants to control everything and can't cope with any demands.
So, Katie, it would be interesting to know how old your son is. From what you're saying, I'm guessing he's sort of an adolescent. Would that be right? If you can just let us know, because obviously it's slightly different whether you're talking about someone under the age of 10 or someone who's in adolescence, because of course our children, they grow from being dependent on us to being independent. That's the whole purpose, really, isn't it, of parenting, is to take them on that journey through dependency to independence. I think it is very difficult if you have a child with ADHD who isn't motivated by what he's not motivated by. So we know this is a key symptom,
challenge,
of ADHD, that we're motivated by interest, we're motivated by newness. He's 12, brilliant, not got a formal diagnosis. Okay, so people with ADHD are motivated by interest, newness, challenge, and urgency. So that's me writing my essay at the last minute because it's got to be in tomorrow. Challenge is that I'll do something once, I'll do it brilliantly, and then I'll never do it again. And people are like, but you painted such a gorgeous painting that time, why have you never done that again? Well, I've done it now. So it is important to understand how our brains work. So one of the things that you can do is actually, in order to get him to do the things that he doesn't want to do, like maybe tidy his bedroom or do his homework or something like that, is to motivate him in the moment. So one of the things that I also teach is I teach a parenting program called 123 Magic. And you can actually look it up online and you can find the book. And it's really great for helping motivate children into doing, those household chores or the homework and things like that. And they've got different techniques. You can, if he might be too old for the sticker chart, but they've got different ways of trying to motivate a child. And I've done it with my children, and it does work. They're 9 and 6, but you can do it up until their adolescence as well.
We were talking last week with Tigger Pritchard, who's an expert in PDA, that's pathological demand avoidance.
Yeah.
And he was also saying, and this might or might not be helpful for Katie, but he was also saying that, part of the issue is that, you're through the day, whether you know it or not, you're often piling on, maybe even not yourself, just life generally. But as a parent, you're often piling on demands, even little ones, to to your children, you know, and it's sort of the demand count significantly increases, and as it does, the sort of ability to cope reduces. And what he was saying is that we need to find ways of sort of prioritizing what demands really matter the most. You know, is it more important that he gets a good night's sleep or has a healthy meal, rather than, you know, he sits at the dinner table talking with, you know, being with the family, you know, and you know, being together at the dinner table, you know, what's going to be important, and maybe recognizing that. So that, I suppose, that might also come into this, you know, as you were saying, boosting motivation, but thinking also about, you know, what demands might, you know, be wise to try to reduce. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I think that is very interesting. It's made me think about what an ADHD practitioner told me about my son when he was diagnosed. And I'm just going to draw a tiny little graph. I don't know if you can see it. Can you? I've not.
Yeah, a little bit higher. If you go a little bit higher, there you go.
Like that.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
You can see there's a sort of line, right? And she called that the lose it line. And actually, underneath is the dotted line of where the child is in terms of that overload. So the child is very, very close to the lose it line all the time. So they only need a tiny little something to make them go over it. And she was explaining this in terms of taking medication, is that what the medication does, when it's the right medication at the right dose for the right child, is that it brings that, it lowers that lowers that dotted line.
Yeah.
So that the child will still have the same emotional response to being asked to do something, or turning the television off, or taking them away from Fortnite, or whatever it might be. But they won't go over their lose it line. They'll just go up and then back down again. So there's no doubt that if you do suspect ADHD and you can pursue a diagnosis, that will also help. And then, you know, if you want to consider medication, that would help as well. I know I've seen my son at 6, the difference before and after medication was quite surprising, even for me, who had already quite a lot of knowledge about it.
Thank you. Katie's just added that he's been out of school for a year, as he couldn't cope with it, and he barely leaves the house. Bless him. I mean, school is obviously a hugely demanding, stressful, potentially, you know, potentially blamey kind of place, right? Or place of that isn't really, you don't get the understanding often.
No.
But obviously it's going to depend, as you said earlier. But if you're in that kind of school that hasn't got that kind of approach and philosophy, positive philosophy, and it's going to be really difficult, isn't it?
And of course, at his age, presumably he's just gone into secondary school, and that's a really, really vital time for some who haven't had a diagnosis. You know, if the child gets picked up in primary school, it's so much more advantageous for the child, because of course once they get into secondary school, the demands are so much greater. I had my mental health took a turn for the worst when I left primary school and went to secondary school at 12, and I had to go back a year, and so I repeated my first year of secondary school. It's so difficult because obviously you need to be supported by your GP. I don't know if you're waiting for an assessment. In my area, it's 2.5 years in Greenwich to have an assessment. It's too long. You know, that's 2.5 precious years of a child's life. When if they do have ADHD, we need to know this way, way sooner. So there's a number of different things that need to happen. Of course, the school need to support you. You need to be supported in terms of an ADHD pathway. The Thrive program works. We do take children through the program. When they're under 18, we normally always take the parent through as well at the same time. So we've got a teenage version of the book and a main adult version of the book. And so by teaching the parents to thrive, they are automatically going to be, you know, teaching the child. It kind of, you know, we learn our thinking styles from our parents and the people around us.
Yeah. And just to sort of, I suppose, highlight, since you're talking about the parents and their role, I mean, the impact all of this must be having on Katie's mental health must be really, really bad as well, really tough. And that's just, yet again, so important, key reminder as to why we've got to look after all of our mental healths.
Yeah.
And that's going to hopefully protect us. And thinking about that line that you drew, I suppose it's the same with just general mental health, isn't it? We're all trying to cope, and, the stresses add up, and we can only take so much. But if our mental health is protected or improved, then things go hand in hand. So your program really could make a real difference in that respect as well, presumably.
Yeah. No, for sure. It is so difficult. I mean, I like I say, I'm also a parent of 2 children with ADHD, and I've had to battle to get them diagnosed. I really have. My daughter presented very much like me, where she was filling in the Connors test, and at home it was high, but in school it wasn't being picked up because she was conforming, she was doing well, they weren't seeing any of the impairment. But yet I was still having the teachers say to me, she does seem quite sensitive, and she often wants me, this was year 1, the teacher would say, well, she often does want me to check in with her and sort of asks more than the other children whether or not she's done things right. And I said, well, this is ADHD. That is what ADHD is. She's doing that because she hasn't heard the instruction. She doesn't actually know what's being asked of her. And then she would say, oh, yes, when we ask her to do free sort of writing, they're only year 1, year 2, she would write a sentence and then stop. Well, that's because she doesn't really know what's being expected of her. And she needs the stimulus to write the second sentence and then write the third sentence. So yes, children with ADHD need more attention.
And this,
not a great deal more of attention, but they do need the teacher to be checking in with them, and they do need accommodations to be put in place. So, I did have to say to them, you need to sit her at the front of the class. And actually, by the year 3, so this was reception year 1, year 2, year 3, she was diagnosed in year 3. And for 4 years consecutively, I'd gone to the teachers, I'd gone to the head teacher. I told them I had ADHD myself. I kept saying, trust me, she has ADHD. Trust me. This is exactly how I presented. By the time she was diagnosed in year 3, her really brilliant year 3 teacher, she said to me at the parents' room, she goes, oh, I've moved her from one side of the room to the other because I figured out that if she's in front of the window, she looks out of the window and she's distracted. So once the teachers know, it ends up being a benefit to them.
Yeah. It's a win-win, isn't it?
It's a win-win.
Oh,
so, and she goes, and so she's sat on the chair. She asked my daughter, what would you like? What do you need in the classroom? And she said to her, well, I really fidget on the carpet, sitting down cross-legged. So I'd like to sit on a chair. Easy accommodation. So simple. And that came from the child.
Just one last thing I'd like to sort of highlight, just to pick up what you're saying, really fully agree, Katharine, is just, I think what you're saying really, again, emphasizes the importance of not just, and I'm certainly not saying Katie does this, I'm saying on a social level that we shouldn't just simply see it as the child's fault,
No.
or blame the child.
No.
I mean, this really is something that is incredibly, potentially managed positively in these educational settings. If the schools have that philosophy, can identify what's needed, put in place those positive accommodations, as you put it, then you're giving that child every chance to reach their potential, feel better about themselves, their self-efficacy, and they reduce their anxiety, and you're going to have less risk of dropout, aren't you? And more, and that's also going to be critical for the child's and the parents' well-being in the long run, because all the child's going to know is, oh God, I haven't been able to cope in school, it's my fault, what have I done? How comes all the other children are doing all right but I'm struggling? You don't want to pile that kind of self-blame, when really a lot of the onus of responsibility is actually all around that child.
The community.
Yeah. Katie's just asking how she would be able to get on the Thrive program, because she thinks it would really help. Which was, I was going to ask you that as well.
Yeah.
How people can
contact me directly. I've got a Facebook page, Thrive with Katharine. I've got my mobile number, which I can give out, which is 07828 852 998, which people are very welcome to give me a ring or send me a text. If you go onto the thriveprogram.org, you can also learn more about it. That's the general website, and there is, under one of the consultants, you look for my name, Katharine Pons, you'll find me. And of course, I mean, I'm in Southeast London and I can see people locally here face to face in normal times. But
yeah, of course, yeah.
It doesn't make any difference whether we deliver the program online or face to face.
Okay. Is it being delivered online at the moment?
Yeah. So so what I say is it's an individual coaching program that's between 6 and 8 sessions long, and you buy the workbook, and we work through the workbook together. And we have an hour coaching session over 6 to 8 weeks, once a week.
Well, it really sounds fantastic, Katharine. It really does, and I hope people can check that out.
I did it myself. This is what I should add, is that I found it 5 or 6 years ago when I was struggling so much with my own phobia, because I'd had my children by then. Of course, children get sick, they vomit, they bring back the norovirus, all these horrible things. For me, it just became unmanageable, and it got me over my phobia. So I decided to train and become a consultant in it myself, because I'm so passionate about it.
Oh, thank you. That's amazing. Thank you. I think that's pretty much it from my side. James, have you got anything you wanted to say or add or ask?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you as well, Katharine. I think we should kind of emphasize the importance of programs like yours, and encourage people to pursue them, because leaving things is kind of probably the worst thing people could do, because the longer things go on and problems develop, I think other kind of health problems, mental health problems can develop as well. I've had a few friends that have had things like chronic fatigue and things like that, they're in their 40s and things like that, and they've sort of said if only there was something that could have helped them when they were younger, so I'd encourage people to pursue it now.
There's no time like the present, and actually right now is the best time to do it, because of course we are all stuck at home, most of us, and we're having, even I myself I'm having to work harder at thriving than in my normal, pre-COVID life, because times are challenging. It's a process. So yes, it's definitely the best time to do it.
Katie's just sort of come back and said thank you. She said, amazing, thank you so much. I'm so glad I found you. I've learned more in the couple of lives, I think she means live streams, in the couple of live streams I've seen than I've learned in the many years of my fine arts. Wonderful to hear.
Thanks so much, Katie. Well, please get in touch. It'd be a pleasure. And I do offer a 1-hour free consultation to anybody who wants to know more. So there's no strings attached. We just have a conversation for an hour, and then we can go from there.
Great. And then also Joanna Sobeka has just wanted to also say that was amazing. Thank you. So yeah.
Thank you.
I agree with her. It was amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really enjoyed.
Well, thank you so much. It was just brilliant to talk to you. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thanks again. Take care of yourself, Katharine, in these unsettling times.
Stay well, everybody. Stay well.
Thank you, Katharine. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.